Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Life with Loverly podcast. I'm excited for today's episode because we are chatting all things Enneagram. If you're not familiar with the Enneagram, it's a system that categorizes people into 9 different personality types. But the distinction between this system and others is that the typing isn't based on behavior, it's about our biggest fears and biggest desires that motivate us to behave certain ways. And I thought, who better to walk us through learning about this assessment than Ashton Whitmoyer-Ober, known as Enneagram Ashton on Instagram. With a master's in community psychology and experience coaching teams and individuals, she makes learning about ourselves so much fun. Before we dive in, I want to list the 9 Enneagram types so that you can follow along and start to identify which number you most resonate with. Number 1, the perfectionist. Number 2, the helper. Number 3, the achiever. Number 4, the individualist. Number 5, the investigator. Number 6, the loyalist. Number 7, the enthusiast. Number 8, the challenger. And number 9, the peacemaker. The Enneagram has been a really helpful tool in our work environment to strengthen relationships and increase self-awareness. So it was really fun to walk through the different types in our office and bring real-life examples to this episode. Okay, friends, I hope this brings new pieces of yourself to light today because you deserve to live out your best life. Here's my conversation with Ashton Whitmoyer-Ober. Hi, friends. Welcome back to today's episode of the Life with Loverly podcast. I am so excited to be talking to Ashton from Enneagram Ashton on Instagram. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
This is going to be so exciting. I feel like for the past probably 5 or 6 years, when I learned about what my Enneagram number was and kind of like started paying attention to Enneagrams, there's been so much information that I've learned, and I'm excited to talk with an expert.
Yeah, I feel like over the past, 10 years, it's really created more of like this popular atmosphere for people
Yeah,
to create content around it and to put a lot of information out there. But then that also means that it can be like information overload at times. So
right.
I'm excited for your audience to be able to have a starting point, or,
Yeah.
maybe they're kind of familiar with it and just are able to have some digestible information.
So prior to becoming an Enneagram coach, what were you doing before that?
So I was working in the nonprofit world. So I am
Okay.
a community psychologist by trade, and I was working in the
Okay.
domestic violence and sexual assault prevention field, and also as a part-time professor. And so I still am a part-time professor teaching in
Okay.
the field of human services. But once I got or once I discovered the Enneagram, I had always been helping people with relationships, like
Mhm.
healthy relationships. I was going into schools and teaching students how to have healthy relationships with their romantic partners or their friends. And so when I discovered the Enneagram, I realized that it's just a tool to help people also be able to do that. And so I could
Yeah.
kind of intermix what I was previously doing by using this tool to help people have healthier relationships.
Totally. And I'm sure like some of your just like schooling knowledge and like your background, you can probably see how some of the things like click and overlap. And
Totally.
it's like
Mhm.
interesting.
Yes. I do love to, like, understand people. Like, that has always
Yeah.
been something that I have loved to do, and so being able to have the language of the Enneagram really helps with that as well, because it's just one other aspect of being able to understand each other.
Yeah. Did you have any idea how your life would change after you were introduced to
No.
Enneagram?
I literally was on my way home from, like, a Christmas break
Uh-huh.
vacation, and I was in the car with my husband at the time. We were engaged. And I was like, you know what? I've been obsessing about the Enneagram and I need like a creative outlet. So I'm just going to create this Instagram account and start to like create content. And then it from there, it kind of exploded. I mean, there's no better way to explain it. And then people started to ask me for help figuring out their type. And so I remember coming home one day and saying, I think this is something now. Like, I think this is turning
Yeah.
into something. But I would have never guessed that 7 years later, this
I
is
know.
my full-time job, and that like a job like this actually exists, right? Like you
Totally.
are taught to go to school, get a job, and like we are just
Yeah.
changing the trajectory of expectations when it comes to the workplace.
Totally, which is
Mhm.
I hope people find encouragement from that, that you can really be passionate about something and do something with it, you
Yeah,
know?
totally.
So what's your Enneagram number?
So I'm a 2 with a 3
Okay.
wing. It's a great example of how it's difficult to type people. So, like as anybody everybody does this, right? When we're listening to the different types, it's easy for us to say like, "Oh, that sounds like my brother," or "That sounds like my best
Yeah.
friend," or "That sounds like my spouse." But what we are seeing in them are ultimately behaviors, and what the enneagram is based on your motivation, so your biggest fears and then your biggest desires, and that drives your behaviors. So to everybody else, I look like a 3 because the 3 is the achiever, and they're motivated and they're driven, and stereotypically a lot of entrepreneurs are 3s because like we have to be in
Yep.
order to like be successful. But to everybody else, they're seeing those behaviors, but they're not asking me like, well, what's the motivation behind those behaviors? And so my
Yeah.
motivation stays with the 2, which is so 2 with a 3 wing is what I am, which the wings just means it's the numbers on either side of your main type. And so most people do have
Mhm.
one that's stronger than the other.
It's so fascinating. I'm actually a 3 wing too.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I assumed.
But yeah. Okay, so if somebody wants to know what their Enneagram number is, what test do you suggest?
So my thoughts on tests, they're a great place to start, but
Okay.
it goes way deeper than that. And that's because like I just said, when we're taking tests, tests are often asking us questions based on behaviors, right? So do you have this need to strive for perfection, or do you find yourself being more extroverted or introverted? Like those are all behavior traits. What tests aren't asking is the why. So, like, why are
Mhm.
you more extroverted? Or why do you get caught up in perfectionism? So, take the test, but take a test that's going to give you a probability of your results. So, a test like Truity or the Ready, which is the Riso Hudson Enneagram typing instrument, shortened to the Ready. I know it's confusing, but I'll give
Okay.
you all the links. Those will give you a probability. So they'll give you a score for each of the types versus a test that will say, like, you are a 7 or you are a 9, because
Mhm.
there's just no way for a test to actually know that. So
Right.
take your top 3 results and then dig deep into, those motivations. Like, really sit with what
Mhm.
makes you the most uncomfortable, because the reality is that sometimes with the Enneagram, it does make you feel a little bit like, "Oh, do I really
You're
do that?"
right. It's
Mhm.
which I think is, like, such a beautiful tool, though, because then you can be aware.
Right.
I
Yeah.
find that, like, emotional intelligence and Enneagram can kind of, like, go hand in hand with helping you to be a better person,
Mhm.
and, like, realizing some things that you might do and how to either, like, adjust those or amplify those.
Yeah.
Um
100%. It's all about self-awareness at first. Is once we
Mhm.
recognize that we do these things, then we can start to change some of those behaviors that we don't really like about ourselves. And then when we're
Right.
using the Enneagram with other people, we can start to understand other people's behaviors and why they might do things that annoy us, or
Yeah.
do things differently than the way that we would, because they have different motivations for driving their behaviors.
Totally. Okay, so I'm a 3, and let's walk through like the motivations, fears, and tendencies of a 3R, and then I
Okay.
can tell you how I resonate with that.
Yeah. So the 3 is called the achiever.
Mhm.
Which is why, like I said, stereotypically, a lot of entrepreneurs are threes, but remember that's a behavior. So
Yeah.
the simple act, maybe not simple, but the act of achieving, it's again, why do you feel this need to achieve? So for threes, their biggest desire is to be successful, but
Mhm.
ultimately to be seen as competent, capable, and efficient because of that success. And notice that I said to be seen, right? So, like,
Right.
threes really want to be seen and celebrated and validated because of the things that they're doing. Three's
Yes.
biggest fear tends to be failure. So they do fear failure the most. Sometimes they fear failure so much that it's difficult for them to try something new if they don't
Mhm.
automatically know that they're going to be good at it. But then they also fear being seen as incapable, incompetent, and really unsuccessful because they failed. So then this leads to some stereotypical Enneagram 3 behaviors, which, like I said, they do have this drive to achieve. They're very results focused, goal oriented. They are confident in who they are. They're encouraging. They love to set and achieve goals, but they also love to have people do that with them. So they encourage other people to climb the ladder, so to speak,
Mhm.
to be able to do those things as well. They are, like I said, great cheerleaders. The um, they're very confident and they're also very charismatic. So they're very social. They almost have this chameleon-like tendency where they can be whoever anybody needs them to be in that moment. Where threes can get in trouble sometimes is they often tie their value into what they're doing. And so they can get caught up in some identity issues sometimes, where if you strip away all of the different roles that you play, like who actually are you? Right? And
Right.
and that's very difficult for threes to answer. They also like to impress other people, and so sometimes they might tie their value into other people's opinions of them, which can be a challenge. And then sometimes they can be a little bit overly competitive or step on other people to get ahead in order to achieve whatever it is that they're set out to do. They also, because they tie their value into what they're doing, can have workaholic tendencies. And that's because it just makes a lot of sense, because if they
Mhm.
feel like the more that I do, the more respected that I'll be. And so why wouldn't I just keep doing so that people
Yep.
will respect me more? Like it just makes sense to a three. So those are some key
Yeah.
pieces about the three.
Yeah, that's hitting hard on all of those fronts. It's interesting because I feel like I want all of those things, but then at times where I'm like, "Ooh, but what's that, like, good bridge to gap between, like, the negatives and the positives or making shifts?"
And the reality is that it is on a spectrum. So what we
Mhm.
call like the healthy versus unhealthy side of the type. And so you're not going to be the healthiest version of your type all the time. Like
Right.
there's like I'm not like I've been doing this work for years, I'm not the healthiest version of my type, but the thing is we have this awareness of when
Mhm.
we're not being the healthiest version of our type,
Right.
and that helps us to get out of that a little bit faster.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so everybody has their own number, and then we also have a wing, which you talked about. Can you maybe just go into a little bit more detail about the wing and then specifically talk about the two, like a wing two for me?
Yeah. So the wing, like I said, are the numbers on either side of your main type. A common misconception is that it's just your second highest score, like if you take a test. So, for example, as a three, you probably also score high for a one. And so somebody would
Mhm.
read those results and say, oh, I'm a three wing one, and kind of just go on with their day, not realizing that your wing does have to be next to your type. So, as a three, your wings would be a two and a four. Most people do have a wing that is stronger Then the other one, like you said, your two wing is stronger, but that doesn't mean that
Mhm.
your four wing doesn't exist. It's just not as developed. And so part of the work of the Enneagram is to see how you can incorporate some of those four traits into your
Yeah.
overall self or your overall being. And I'm willing to bet that you already know like some ways that you could have those four traits.
Yeah.
So, really, your main type holds your motivation. So, your motivations stay with the three, but you're going to take on some of those behavior characteristics of your wing. And so, so the two is the helper. And so, a three with a two wing is going to really be a champion for other people, just really encouraging and uplifting, wanting to help other people out, wanting to help other people succeed, really motivational, like everything that
Mhm.
they're doing is going to be geared more towards other people. A three with a four wing might be a little bit more artistic, creative. They might generate great ideas. They might, have creative hobbies. They might be more in tune with their emotions and other people's emotions, more like romanticized, things like that. And so again, there's
Mhm.
probably a balance, but most people do feel like they gravitate towards one of the wings over the other.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like I haven't, and maybe I just didn't even realize that both wings would be like in factor with the three. But hearing some of the things about the four, I'm like, okay, that's very true. Like
Mhm.
I feel like attached to some of those things you just mentioned as well.
Yeah. And it's not uncommon for people to not know that. It's, you
Yeah.
you see people say like I'm a one wing nine, like like that's part of
Yeah.
their makeup is what they say. And
Yeah.
so people just kind of forget about the other wing and
Right.
go on with it, but it's there. It's there, and it's likely playing a bigger role in your life than you realize.
Right. I'm gonna start reading the like type four, like things about the fours and be like,
Yeah.
how do we feel about that? Okay, so even though we only have one number, is it possible to show up one way at work and one way at home with our type?
So even though we all have one number, and I do want to preface this by saying that your type is with you from birth, it's more of that nature versus nurture. And that's why you
Okay.
can grow up in a family structure with similar life experiences, but people having different types, because you should be able to look back on your life and see how your type showed up throughout
Mm,
your life versus your life dictating what your type is. So, with
okay.
that being said, your type is with you. Your wings, like I said before, can fluctuate. And so, some people, for example, I hear some people say, like, oh, I'm a three with a two at work. But at home, I'm more of a three with a four wing. So, like, those are examples of ways that that could
Okay.
fluctuate. But we also are all connected to two other types. So, one when we are stressed out or overwhelmed or just like not the best version of us. And then the other type is when we are the best version of ourselves or growing or just more in tune with our behaviors. So, for a three, when threes are stressed out, they become so overwhelmed with all of the things that they have to do that they don't want to do any of them. And they kind of freeze up and have no clear direction. They might procrastinate. They might put things off. They lose motivation. They lose purpose and intention. And that looks like the unhealthy nine. But when
Okay.
threes are really healthy, they will be more community focused, team driven, responsible, prepared, planning out things, more organized, and that looks like the healthy Enneagram 6. So what I hear sometimes, like I said, the
Mm,
wings can fluctuate, so people will say this is what I look like uh, at home versus work. But some people also are like, well, I'm kind of stressed out at work. And so I'm taking on more of those stress characteristics at work, or I'm more stressed at home or around this group of friends,
yeah.
whatever that might be. And so there are opportunities for your type to look a little bit different based on what's going on externally,
Okay.
but your
Okay.
main
So
type will
two.
stay the same.
Okay. That makes sense. So two of the girls on my executive team are Enneagram eights.
Mm.
And if someone is close to an Enneagram 8, whether at work or at home, how can we make them feel seen, supported, and motivated to work towards a common goal?
So eights are called the challenger, and they
Mhm.
are extremely independent. They are great leaders. They love to take charge and get things done. So when it goes back to their biggest fears and their biggest desires for an 8, their biggest desire is to protect themselves and other people. And specifically this looks like their people, like they're very protective of their
Mhm.
people or their environment or vulnerable populations. And so I'm willing to bet that the people that work with you are very protective of you, your brand, of the
Mhm.
job, etc. Their biggest fear is being seen as weak or powerless or being controlled. And so a way to support eights is really to allow them to have that um, independence, right? To
Mhm.
not micromanage, to not to like give them the space to be able to lead and get the job done. Eights are really great at taking control of the situation, but they're also great delegators. And so trusting that if they can't get something done, they're going to get it done, just maybe not in the way that you would expect them to.
Yeah.
The job will get done, and it's supporting them along the way, being upfront with them. So they hate when people beat around the bush. So being upfront with them, being honest, being transparent about what's going on, what your expectations are, can be really helpful if you have an issue with them or the work that they're doing. Again, going straight to the source and saying, "Hey, I
Yeah.
think we could improve in this area a little bit." They are totally fine with feedback. There
Mm.
are other types that I would not say that about.
Right.
But 8s are like, "No, tell me what I can do so that I can be better," because they don't wanna be perceived as weak, remember? And so
Right.
they're like, "Tell me what I need to do in order to maintain this, like, strong appearance." But deep down, so 8s do have this strong exterior, but deep down, it's hiding, like, this highly vulnerable interior, and they tend to, um, again, associate vulnerability with weakness. And so
Yeah.
breaking that shell can also be really impactful
Mhm.
because once you do that, you know that like you're with them for life essentially.
Right.
Once you are theirs, once you are their people, they're loyal and committed.
Totally. It's funny, my best friend is also an 8,
Oh
and
yeah.
so many of these things, I'm just like, "Yep, that's Shay, that's Shay, that's
Yeah.
Shay." We've been friends for, like, 20 years, so it's funny.
3s and
Um,
8s too are have a shared kind of energy, like, they both
okay.
like to get things done, they just have different approaches to it, and so, recognizing that you have a shared goal and a shared mission, it just might be a different approach based on who
Yeah.
you are as a person.
So my husband, he's an Enneagram 6, and he also works here at Leverly Gray. He's our, like, president, and he handles all of our behind the scenes business things. So, with me being a 3 and holding more of the visionary role of the company, what are some tips for 3s and 6s to work together relationally?
So I love that he's in that position, first of all, because sixes are just great at like being prepared and seeing the future and anticipating
Mhm.
outcomes and, like all of those things. So just a quick little explanation about the six, like they're called the loyalist and they are driven by fear. And it kind of is upsetting to sixes sometimes that that's how they're known, but it's not a bad thing. It's just that
Right.
they are anticipating what could go wrong and then planning
Mhm.
accordingly so that doesn't happen. And like that's an
Right.
amazing skill set to have because a lot of us who are visionaries do not have that skill set. We're like, I
Right.
have all of these ideas and I'm going to just like do them, and then we need
Right.
somebody in the background who's like, "Wait, wait, wait, did you think this through?" Or, like, the
Yeah.
logical side. And so I'm willing to bet that that's a lot of what you experience is, you are putting the ideas together, and then he is, like, logically outlining how you can make it happen, and,
Mhm.
I was gonna say, if not, that's what I would do.
Yeah.
My husband is also a 6, and like I said, I can
Okay.
look a lot like a 3, and so I relate to and 2s and 3s are very similar. So I relate to a lot of this because, I mean, it's dramatic, but I always say, like, I think I would die without my husband because I'm just not
Mm,
prepared. Like, I don't
literally.
think like that, right? Um
I could not agree more. I mean, Chris always jokes. He's like, "What are you gonna do if something happens to me?" I'm like,
I
"I'm
don't
coming
know.
with you."
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah.
don't like it is like we are a package deal, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
relatable. And so I think really just having you both in positions that fulfill your strengths, right? Or like
Mhm.
really align with your strengths. And it sounds like that's what's happening, is to be able to have somebody who kind of balances out that creative energy. And I always say he like brings me back to life when I'm like up here and people can't see me unless we're on YouTube, but I'm like up here living in this like I have 1,000 ideas and he's giving me the structure to make it happen.
Right. Yeah. No, I definitely think it's like a beautiful combination.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so how has Enneagram impacted your parenting?
Oh my gosh. So my kids are little, so,
Okay.
my kids are 2 and 4, and so, obviously, I don't know what their types are yet, and I
Right.
will say that a lot of people second to the compatibility question is, at what age can I figure out what their type is? And the answer is always at some point in their teenage years when they're able to communicate why they're doing things the way that they're doing
Okay.
them, right? But me as a 2 and a mom, I know what I need to be doing in order to be refilled, in order to take care of myself. And I also know, like I said, when I go into that stress line, I know
Mhm.
kind of what the root of that is, and I can almost feel it, like sense when it's happening and when I'm getting to that point. So I think
Yeah.
because parenting is stressful, right? Like let's not
Yeah.
pretend that
Right.
it's all, you know, roses
Right.
and sunshine and butterflies. There are lots
It's
of
not.
really great moments, and then there are times where I'm like, "Oh, I just went to the 8 because,
Right.
they wouldn't get out the door."
I know, definitely times where I'm like, "Ooh, like,
Ooh,
I
yeah.
just really need
That
to
wasn't my best
apologize."
parenting,
Right.
but okay, we'll move on. And so, knowing your type and knowing the things that might set you off or knowing, these are the ways that, um, I my best friend is also an 8, which is funny. And we were talking about this yesterday because at play dates, I'm just very much go with the flow and, like it'll all work out and I'm very positive and optimistic and it's chaos, but like it's a short season, whatever.
Yeah.
And she is an 8 who's like trying to have control of the situation and needs to know the time we're going, how long we're going to be there, what we're going to be doing there. And so I think that in and of itself just made me think like, oh, this is so funny in our friendship as well as us both being parents and seeing how
Yeah.
different our personalities are.
Right. It is wild, though. Sometimes I'm like, I wonder how like, what my kids are thinking or if they're just like, "Oh, mom,"
I know.
and in comparison to, like, my
Yeah.
best friend or other parents too.
Mhm.
My mom is a 2, and she is like that teacher helper, just like
Mhm.
but she's also very like, "Oh, be careful. Okay, hold on, be careful." And I feel like I have taken on so many of those things in parenting where I'm like, I don't wanna always tell them to be careful
Right.
because they need to, like, figure some things out, but it's funny how some of those things kinda pass down and then you
Mhm.
notice and you're like, "Well, maybe this is why you do that," or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
So speaking about twos and kind of bringing it back to work, I actually have a lot of twos on my team. We just recently did like an Enneagram. We're kind of like doing an Enneagram discussion within some personal development here. And so we all just took a test and kind of figured out where we were. And then several of them are twos. So my question is, what should we know about motivating a two and how do they specifically deal with conflict?
I laugh because not well. I'm allowed to say that because
Yeah.
I am a 2.
Yeah.
Um, so twos are the helper, like we said, and
Yeah.
they're driven by a desire to be liked and loved
Mhm.
and needed and valued and appreciated, like all of those things. And so then
Yeah.
their biggest fear is being unloved, not liked, and not
Yeah.
wanted, not needed, not appreciated. And so the biggest way to motivate a two is to appreciate them and show them or give them tasks that show that they are needed.
Mhm.
The biggest way to kind of demotivate a two is to give them too many tasks because that expectation is already there that you can go to this person because they're going to do it because they want to, right?
Yeah.
What twos struggle with sometimes is similar to threes where they might struggle with saying no, but for threes it's about that like success, right? And being seen
Mhm.
as valuable because of what they're doing. For twos, they might struggle to say no in a workplace situation because they want to feel needed. And then,
Mhm.
therefore, when they feel needed, they feel loved. And so it's,
Right.
again, similar to the threes, but still very different because the feeling of like value and loved is so personal to the person. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's really just going to be about making sure that they feel that. This is why conflict is difficult because
Mhm.
for twos, they tend to fear conflict because they're afraid of what could happen to the relationship. And so whenever there's a conflict situation or tension or whatever, all they're worried about is that the relationship is damaged. So they might not
Mhm.
even be hearing you and what you're saying because they're thinking ahead to like, this is damaged and they hate me
Yeah.
versus actually hearing what's being said. What I recommend for like working through conflict with twos is to kind of like validate the relationship before you even go into, say, like you're offering constructive criticism or something, like validating their relationship. Like, I really appreciate everything you've been doing. I just want to talk about this one area, or, we're good. Like, we're great. I like really appreciate you, but I need to bring this up. Like really just setting the
Yeah.
tone for what the relationship is before going into what's going on, as well as
Yeah.
giving them space to process. So a lot of times they're thinking about, again, they're people pleasers. So they're thinking about what you want to hear versus what they actually want to say.
Mhm. That's like great advice, even just like quick to always be remembering. And I feel like as some of my twos have been with me for a long time, and so I've learned how, you know, to have certain conversations, but just that like extra awareness is
Mhm.
super helpful.
Yeah. And like, that about them now,
Right.
right? Because they're
Totally.
a
Yeah.
2. So you know that with, any sort of and criticism is a harsh word, but any sort of, like, feedback, right? It's
Yeah.
like, "Okay, I need to do the sandwich method where I say something great, and then I insert
Yeah.
the feedback, and then I follow up
Right.
with something great."
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So I also have some nines. How do nines typically react to stress and what can they do to put themselves back into a place of health?
Mhm. So nines are your peacemaker, and so they are very easygoing typically,
Mhm.
easy to get along with, non-judgmental, approachable. They are, remember I said the 3 goes to the unhealthy 9 when they're stressed, and
Yeah.
so the unhealthy 9 looks like being unmotivated, having a difficult time, like, starting. They're actually called the sloth, and so they kind of just, like, move slowly, go along to get
Mhm.
along, just, like, want
Yeah.
to keep the peace. Like that's what their motivation is.
Yeah.
Their motivation is their biggest desire is to maintain a peaceful environment for themselves and for the people around them. Their biggest fear does tend to be conflict. And so, what stresses them out the most is conflict or tension or anything that is disrupting their peace. And that could
Yep.
be relational conflict, or it could be environmental, or, like it could be a lot of different things. So, when nines are stressed out, they move to the unhealthy six. And so that's when they might be kind of crippled with fear, thinking
Yeah.
about worst case scenarios. They might be more anxious or experiencing a lot of worry. They also might start to really doubt themselves and their
Mm.
abilities. And so they, feel like they can't do something. They might be a little bit more insecure and really just down on themselves because of
Yeah.
it. So how to get them back into, are you asking like from somebody who works with them or like the nine
Yeah.
themselves?
Um, Maybe just the 9 themselves.
Yeah. So, first of all, it's a lot about confidence building. And so, exercising the abilities that you're good at, right? So being able
Mhm.
to continue to do things in order to remember that like you're good at doing them and to increase that confidence. It's also really important for nines to just break down your tasks into really small, doable tasks. So instead of, um, let's say a task that you might have for a nine would be, I don't know, create a podcast outline. I'm making this up.
Yeah.
Instead of like writing on your to-do list, create a podcast outline, it's okay, create an intro, create a 3 questions, you're breaking it down as small as possible because every single check of the box is going to increase that confidence in your ability to
Yeah.
get the job done. It's a
I
very
actually
simple
feel
thing
that.
that, yeah, that
Yeah.
people don't realize.
I feel like that even helps me get back into, like, a healthy 3,
Yeah.
because when I'm, like, in a -9, but some of those things where you almost just kinda need to, like, "Okay, like, let's
Need to
go. What
do
can
it.
get
Yeah.
us
Just
back?"
like take
Yeah.
the step.
Yeah. No, that's so true.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Okay, so now we have more of an understanding of the Enneagram. Can you break down the triads of the Enneagram?
So the Enneagram is split up into 3 different triads. Each triad has 3 types, and those types have shared characteristics. So the
Okay.
the gut triad contains types 8, 9, and 1. And what that means is that they receive information kind of through their gut, and then they have this like gut instinct to respond.
Okay.
The only one that kind of represses that gut instinct is your nine. And that's because their gut instinct is typically to not respond or to respond in whatever way other people want them to.
Yeah.
And then they all have the shared characteristic of anger. It just looks different for them. So for eights, anger is just a natural emotional expression. They don't really think much about it. It's like happiness, sadness, anger. For nines, they will bury all of their anger and then it will come out and as being like passive aggressive. And then for ones, they'll say, I'm not angry, I'm frustrated, or I'm annoyed, or I'm disappointed. And to the rest of us, like, no, you're angry, but whatever.
Yeah.
We'll go with it.
Right.
For the heart triad contains types 2, 3, and 4. And so these are our feelers. So they receive information through their heart and then they feel things before moving forward. So they make decisions
Mhm.
kind of based on how they feel about something. The biggest difference is that the threes are the ones that are going to repress those feelings the most. And so that's because they might say like I don't have time to access those feelings or it might those their
Mhm.
feelings or their emotions might look like passion to them versus like feelings and emotions as we collectively know them. But the heart triad has the shared characteristic of shame. So for twos, it's am I like doing enough for other people or contributing enough? For threes, it's am I achieving enough or getting enough
Mhm.
done? And then for fours, it's simply am I enough who I am? And then they all want to create significance or meaning from experiences. And I
Yep.
forgot to say for the gut triad, they are all like kind of justice focused.
Okay.
And then for the head triad, that contains types 5, 6, and 7. So these are the people who are going to be thinking things through or overthinking, just spending a lot of time in their head. The type that represses that the most is the 7. And that's because they will act on impulse and then think about it after. So they're still
Mhm.
overthinking, but it tends to be after the fact.
Mhm.
They have a shared characteristic of fear. So for fives, it's the fear that their resources or personal space will be depleted. For sixes, it's the main connection with fear. We talked about this earlier.
Mhm.
And then for sevens, they tend to fear like missing out or being trapped or like
Yeah.
held back or held down. And then they all really just want to feel like safe and secure. They value security. So, for example, your husband, right, being a six,
Mhm.
when making decisions or presented with decisions, he's going to be thinking them through, whereas you might be reacting based on how you feel about something or what you're passionate about. Like, I
Right.
feel like making decisions in the workplace is such an easy way to see the triads unfold because everybody just functions differently based on their type.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what is the biggest thing that you wish people knew about the Enneagram?
Just how it sounds like so cheesy, but just how like life changing it can be.
Yeah.
The fact that there's this tool out there that tells you not just like who people are, but why people do things the way that they do can just help in
Yeah.
so many different relationships. I always say the relationship that changed the most with the Enneagram for me was my relationship with my sister. My sister is an Enneagram 8, and me being an Enneagram 2, we are just really different on paper. We I'm very emotional and I'm a high feeler, and she's very, gut focused, straight to the point, brutally honest. And
Mhm.
so my entire life growing up, I just thought that she was yelling at me. And like, but then I realized after I discovered the Enneagram, which unfortunately was, in my 20s,
Yeah.
I realized that she's just passionate and that's just how she communicates.
Yeah.
And now and then she also just realized like, "Oh, I'm just emotional and hypersensitive." But now she knows that like I have this desire to feel loved and liked and stuff and needed and appreciated. And
Yeah.
so now that we are in our 30s and we're both parents and like there's still family conflict at times, and I'm able to understand what it is that she needs in that moment. I'm able to stay to understand when she needs space. She knows what I need when I'm going
Yep.
through a hard time. Like that's what I wish people understood, is that having this tool can just be so impactful for your relationships, where it takes out so much of the guesswork
Yeah.
when we're assuming things about each other, that a lot of times those assumptions are incorrect. And when we're able
Mm.
to communicate with a shared language, it just changes the outcome of your relationships.
Yeah. No, that's so true. Um, so do you have any resources or like books that you would recommend? I know there's all sorts of things out there. I picked up like a devotional one time that was like an Enneagram 3 devotional, and I found it like so fascinating. But is there anything that you recommend?
So I did write 3 books on the Enneagram, so I
Love it.
have to talk about them first.
Absolutely.
So the Enneagram for Relationships was my first book. The second one is The Enneagram Made Simple, and then the third one is a little bit of Enneagram. And so those are great books, specifically the last two to start. I kind
Mhm.
of did it in reverse order, but the one is about relationships specifically. But other than that, there are some really great websites, like the Enneagram Institute is a really great website for a deep dive into the Enneagram. And there are just a lot of books and resources out there that when I first started doing this, there weren't. I think there
No.
was one book, The Road Back to You, that everybody read and everybody recommended. And now we have just so many resources at our fingertips to give people more information about the Enneagram.
I love that. And we will link these resources and the 3 books that Ashton has written in the show notes so you guys can check those out for easy access too. Okay, Ashton, wrapping this up, I always end my podcast episodes asking the same question. And that is, what is the most meaningful act of kindness that somebody has extended to you that has had a lasting impact on your life?
That's really difficult because I feel like there's been so many moments of that. And it's probably in part because I'm an Enneagram 2, and I feel like every connection is meaningful.
Yeah, I know.
um, but I would say specifically, I mean, it's been 2 years at this point, but my son was born almost 2 months early.
Mhm.
And that's just a moment in my life that I will never forget because of the people that showed up in that
Yeah.
moment when I had an emergency C-section and I had a 2-year-old at home, and then he was in the NICU. And so, like, really thinking when I think about people who have made a meaningful impact, it's not just like family and friends who showed up during the hardest times, but NICU nurses like
Mhm.
deserve all of the credit and just all of the praise in the world because I do not know how they do their job.
Yeah.
And the support that they offer to parents is just incredible.
Yeah. I love that. That's really special. Well, this has been a very informative episode. I am fascinated to go read up a little bit more on my wings and some of like when I'm in a happy, healthy place
Yeah.
and when I'm in a negative place, I'm going to dig a little bit more because sometimes I feel like, oh, you find out what you are and then you're just like, oh, everything that's a 3, like that's all I'm going to consume. But
Right.
there's really so much more you can look into.
Yeah. That's what I always tell people is when you read a book on the Enneagram, don't just flip through to your type. Like, read it in its
Yeah.
entirety because you're connected to so many of the types.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, Ashton, do you mind sharing where our listeners can find you on Instagram and your website?
Yes, you can find me at Enneagram Ashton. It's ENNEAGRAM Ashton. And my website is the same. So just enneagramashton.com.
Perfect. And we will leave all of those links in the show notes for you guys. Again, thank you so much for joining. And until next time, friends.
Thanks for having me.